If you're a podcast host, listen up, this one's for you. My name is Allie Jackson. I'm the host of Finding Mr. Height, a dating and relationship podcast that I've been doing for 4 years now, sharing my positive and practical approach to dating that's built on my own life experience. And I wanted to share another experience that I've had, my secret behind monetizing my show. It's called Red Circle, and I was just telling my colleague about how much I love their platform. With Red Circle, not only am I getting a seamless hosting experience, but I also love the support I receive in ad sales. It's not just typical ad sales either. It's targeted opportunities based on my show and my life. And the platform is super simple. You just set your preferences and Red Circle matches you with sponsors that align with your show. You can vet every opportunity and their platform gives you great analytics. More recently too, my Red Circle team has brought me opportunities outside of my podcast on social media to really augment the podcast partnerships, bring them full circle. I just can't recommend them enough. If you want to give it a try, go to redcircle.com to get your free trial. That's redcircle.com for a free trial.
Welcome to IndoctriNation, a weekly conversation series about protecting yourself from systems of control. I'm your host, Rachel Bernstein.
You are not alone. And now there are 2 resources that I've put together specifically for your journey. This is your host, Rachel Bernstein. I am an educator and a therapist and a cult specialist. And I am very excited to announce Restart and Restore, a journal for survivors of manipulation, and a companion notebook that I've put together to go with it that has people's stories that they've shared with me that they wanted to share with you, and some wonderful quotes from people whose thoughts I truly admire, and more pages and writing prompts for you to continue with the writing that can help you along your healing journey. This isn't just another blank journal. It's a trauma-informed recovery companion, and it offers psychoeducation on the mechanics of manipulation and control and therapeutic writing prompts to explore your history and your strengths, practical exercises that transform insights into some actionable steps, and the freedom to heal at your own pace. You can do it in the time frame that works for you without any judgment or pressure. Whether you joined the organization or the relationship that was controlling as a teen or as an adult, Restart and Restore provides the structure and, I think, validation needed to process your experiences safely. I'm also excited to share, beyond the journal and its companion notebook, that I'm currently working on a second journal specifically for those born and raised in high control groups or high control family units, as their healing journey often involves different and specialized challenges. Restart and Restore and its companion notebook are available now, and you can find the link in the show notes. Thank you very much. I hope it's helpful to you or to someone you love. Hello. Today on the show, we have Davis Carbo. He is 30 years old and lives in Atlanta, Georgia. He owns a training development agency with his twin brother. Their agency is called Educate Agency. It's EDUC and the number 8. And they build training for B2B clients. They're a full service that builds custom employee training courses and then hosts them on their proprietary LMS, which is Learning Management System software. Their flagship product is the Sales Neuro Blueprint, which is a coaching program where he teaches people how to sell and guide decision-making using neuroscience. He's a content creator for the Unbiased Series and Neuro Blueprint series on Instagram and TikTok. And he is someone who's really interesting to talk to. We went over a lot of great ideas, and I really look forward to having you hear him. Here's Davis now. Every once in a while, I go online and I hear someone talking and I think, oh, that sounds just right. Like, this is what I deal with day in and day out. And I love the way they approach it. And I love the language that's used. And I love that they have an interest in this and really understanding the mind and how people work and how I think not only psychology, but social psychology and neuropsych and all of it gets put together. So I was so happy when I reached out to you and you said, yeah, would love to chat. I would love for you to take a moment to introduce yourself and not only what you do, but kind of what brings you to be interested in these subjects. And then we'll start talking about some other things.
My name is Davis Carbo. I believe, Rachel, you saw me online. I'm the host of a series I created called the Unbiased Series, where each day I break down one of the many cognitive biases that we have, and I kind of explain how it works. I like to add in some storytelling about it, and then I usually give an example or a few examples, and then I tell you how to break or overcome the bias and ways to basically bring awareness to it. I also run a training development agency where I build training content. And so there's a lot of overlap between psychology and education. And so I've always just been really interested in it. I also have done sales for a long time. So there's a good overlap there. Roundabout answer, everything I do has some psychology in it. I think everything comes back to how our brain works and how we operate. And so I just love breaking it down and exploring the brain.
Oh, it's so good. And I think looking at bias, one of the reasons that I really wanted to be able to have you on is that there's this other kind of bias that people who I work with in counseling or in my support groups, or people who come onto the podcast to tell their experiences, they've had to deal with certain bias of judgment towards them, that they were gullible, that they are weak. It's a weird thing when someone says, oh, I got involved in a cult or my kid got involved in a cult. It kind of prompts people to posture in this superior way, like, oh, I would never have, I would have seen through that. But I look at what they're wearing and I think they don't even realize that the reason they chose their outfit is for a reason that almost had nothing to do with their own thinking. So I think that there is something that is really very biased about this whole way of looking at people who get caught up or who get convinced of things that aren't true. And so that's why I really wanted us to understand the mind and its vulnerabilities and why they're built in, I think, for survival too, that we can influence each other. I often give the example of if everyone's sort of standing somewhere and suddenly 5 people go running by and they're looking behind them, people will start running too because they're thinking they're running from something or someone. It could be nothing. Could be that this was all sort of play acting, but people will start running with them because we, I think, again, for survival, influence each other and make that kind of impact. But it can also be abused and it can be taken advantage of. But what does it mean about our brains that we're influenceable and that it isn't weakness?
Yeah. I think what we could start with is kind of just looking at, all right, what is the definition of a bias? It's a deviation from purely rational thought. And so really biases and these quick mental shortcuts, they kind of are what make us human. So it's never something that we should judge ourselves on necessarily, because there's some biases that aren't inherently good or bad, they just are. Learning about biases and learning about how our brain works and how our brain wants to make these mental shortcuts, it's really important. It's just incredibly important to understand what are the natural tendencies of the brain. And I've been working on a project. This isn't a plug, but it kind of gives context as to where I'm coming from. It's called the Sales Neuro Blueprint, where I try to break down and understand the brain's natural decision-making process and then learn how to reverse engineer that. And the thing I've learned, or the biggest takeaways I've learned from working on this project and working on the Unbiased series, is that our brain was developed to act in a certain way, mainly for survival. And there's what are known as 2 systems in the brain. This is pulled from a book, if you have ever seen Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. Daniel Kahneman is just incredible He's passed, unfortunately, but I like to call him like the godfather of biases because he has done so much research into understanding the brain. And in this book, Thinking Fast and Slow, he outlines that there's essentially two systems in the brain. The first is the automatic, the autopilot, and then there's the manual. Our brain, when it shifts into the manual mode of thinking, it goes through a couple different steps. But the main thing to think about, to not get too into the weeds unless we want to go deeper, is it's really logical analysis. And that's where we slow things down and we really think about our options and think about which choice we want to make. And the reason why all of this is important is that moving into manual and moving into this slower logical thinking uses energy, glucose in the brain. The reason why that's important is that our brain does not want to go into this logical analysis often because we only have so much energy to use. And so when it can, it will try to put everything it can into this automatic way of thinking, whether that's through biases or habits. It will do anything it can to make these mental shortcuts to make our life a little bit easier and to move faster. But sometimes that quick thinking and those biased thinking acts is detrimental because it replaces or it substitutes accuracy for speed in a lot of ways that when we're going throughout our lives, we have to be cognizant and kind of be aware of how our brain does this because, to your point, it could be used to our disadvantage if people understand how our brain makes these subconscious decisions and has these biases and habits.
Right. It's interesting about speed because when I talk to people who have gotten involved in large group awareness trainings, like the LifeSpring Landmark, used to be asked, a lot of these groups, you're supposed to make a commitment right away. You have to sign up for the next thing, even though you're not quite sure if you got anything from the first thing. But you have to keep going. And are you really going to delay your progress? Are you going to show that you don't really care about self-actualization? Why are you slowing things out? The reason that you're not achieving what you want to achieve is that you take time to think things through like this, and then you let doubt in, and that's somehow getting in your way. People are so used to operating in this really quick way where they just have to say yes. The whole Tony Robbins, like, you have to be in this realm of yes, whatever. And I'm thinking, like, no, how about maybe?
Right.
I like maybe. Like,
Agreed.
until further notice, let's find out a little more information. But being in the realm of maybe doesn't sound as sexy, right? But it's safer. So that's an interesting thing to bypass, I think, proof, logic, that doubt isn't getting in your way. It's your safety net. And also having to have someone else prove something to you before you make a commitment, that it's not all up to you to show you're in this, but based on what? What have I already gotten? Have I gotten anything? Or am I just even more confused? And now they're saying, but if you sign up for the next level, you'll understand what you were taught in the first level. And you can just imagine that's going to happen at every level. Very interesting that speed is a part of this. I thought right away about these moments that people described to me.
When we're looking at the brain's decision-making process from like a macro view, the first step is what's called emotional tagging by the amygdala. And the amygdala is also known as our brain's bodyguard because it's what processes threats. And so emotional tagging basically happens like within an instance, and there's a couple different tags. The three main things that the brain tags for when it's looking at different things emotionally, the first tag is threat versus safety. The second is reward versus punishment. And then the third is novelty or newness. And so these things are really what are called salient, meaning they're emotionally resonant, like they're very emotional. They stick out to us. When we experience anything that when our brain processes a threat or safety or reward and punishment, then our brain, what it does is it goes through the second step, which is pattern recognition, to look back to our past and say, what have we seen before? And how does this align? Usually, when people are looking to influence other people to get them to do things, they're really tapping into these two processes of emotion and basically trust to get them to respond in a certain way, especially when it comes to trying to get them to avoid, let's say, avoid logical analysis or like thinking deeply. So, for example, if someone says, hey, are you tired of blank? Are you tired of being the way that you are? And these are really emotional leading questions to invoke somebody to get really emotional. That just increases speed. It gets them moving faster and thinking faster. And yeah, there's a ton of stuff behind how to actually use this to someone's advantage or disadvantage.
So I'm thinking about people who, and this is not to say something that's a blanket statement. It's a self-selected group of people who contact me. It means they had a bad experience in a particular group. When I think about Eastern religions, how you're supposed to meditate, how you're supposed to be free of thought. So as soon as your mind is free of thought, then you can somehow be in this enlightened space and really blank. And on the one hand, I could see that there's value in that, but it's something that I often want people to ask themselves is, how does this serve me? Or how does this serve the group or the person who's telling me I'm not supposed to think? I'm not supposed to react. Scientology has this whole thing against the reactive mind. You're not supposed to react to what's happening. Well, that makes it a lot easier for people to do whatever they want to you. You're not supposed to be upset. You're not supposed to have any kind of response or after effect from that. So I think it's good to sort of ask why you're being taught that. But it's so pervasive that in so many places, thinking is somehow evil and thinking is somehow the thing that's going to get in your way. And I'm just wondering what that's about.
It's mainly because from that autopilot to manual I was mentioning earlier, is the autopilot is literally just the emotion and pattern recognition. And so if you can get people moving quickly where all you're doing is getting them emotional and then leaning into the patterns to show them that it's safe. Other people have done this before, it's okay. You can get them to make decisions that might not be in their advantage because you don't want them to slow down and actually think about it. And you made a really great point about really what you're looking to cultivate is awareness. If you can become aware of these things, questioning, okay, who's speaking, what's the message, and then how is that impacting me and changing the way I think about it, that's the first thing to do when looking at countering these things.
It's interesting. I'm thinking of some other guests who have been on the show who you've probably heard of, or it would actually be fascinating if you wanted to have conversations with them and if you wanted me to connect you. There's this guy, John Hunter, who talks about manufacturing mania. And a lot of these groups will do that, and businesses will do that. All the chants and going for those weekends and rope courses, and, and like, go, 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 and all of it. And then this woman, Mara Einstein, and yes, she's related, which is cool. She was in companies where she did advertising for big corporations, and she could see how much people's minds were toyed with. And she then decided to shift and study that. And now she talks about that, but how easy it is to do that. Getting very worked up, what does it do? What does it cause us to have blinders to, I think, also when we are so wound up in that way?
When we're really emotionally invested, we're on a high. And what it does is that we release a bunch of dopamine when we're thinking about different options or different things that we could be moving towards or things that we want. And most people misunderstand dopamine as the pleasure chemical, when really dopamine is the anticipation chemical. And so it increases with anticipation of getting something, not when you actually get it. When dopamine is increasing in the brain and we're moving towards something that's positive or something that we want, it actually lowers our decision threshold, meaning it's easier to make decisions and take action. And so when people are in kind of like a manic state of really emotionally impactful, bought in, they're really emotionally invested, that is kind of the perfect time to get people to make decisions because dopamine is high and they're not entering like a critical thinking as deeply as they should when really evaluating their options. I think this might help too. The brain doesn't like uncertainty. We really want to move towards certainty. We like knowing things. We like having certainty around what we're doing with our lives and the outcomes. And so even if maybe your answers aren't, or like the answers that you're looking for aren't 100% perfect when you really flesh them out, if you're emotionally invested and you're really bought in, that's where you could choose something that might be detrimental to you,
Oh, that's so interesting.
just to be certain about it.
Right, right. I love this idea of anticipation, that dopamine increases in the anticipation of something, the carrot that's dangled always that you never quite get in most of these groups that I deal with, or relationships. Like if you start behaving perfectly towards me and stroking my ego just as it should be, then I will never be mean to you and I will never leave you. And so you're kind of in this anticipation. If I learn to do this just right, then everything will be okay. And it never quite is.
Right. It's like the concept of love bombing when you first talk with someone and they give you all of the good feelings, the things that get you emotionally invested, love, compassion, connectedness, and then take it away and hold it kind of at a distance and say, hey, if you want this, then this is what you got to do. That dopamine of, I know what it feels like to have that feeling is what's going to drive you towards it. And that's where it can be weaponized to get people to do things.
So interesting you mentioned the word certainty because there is a company, and I'm not trying to defame the company, just say that. It's called California Psychics. Every time I hear an advertisement for California Psychics, I think this is genius. They know exactly how to hook. So I started looking up the advertising company they hired. And it's an advertising company that's part of what's called The Mission, which kind of scared me a little bit, I have to say. And they are a collection of behavioral science experts who are used in advertising. Their campaign for California Psychics is the joy of certainty. That is fantastic. Exactly what you're talking about. And all of these techniques of influence, like scarcity, and it says here, we only accept 2 out of every 100 psychics. They only hire qualified psychics, which is a term I don't understand at all. Oh, which magician does real magic? What? Okay. Yeah, authority. If it's not life-changing, it's free. They have their psychics go through rigorous testing processes. Okay. But this idea of the joy of certainty, that if you're plagued by doubts or uncertainties, this will give you the answer. And I'm sure they make millions from this.
Oh, yes. Being able to give somebody certainty around something is scratching a evolutionary itch that is very ingrained into us. Safety and certainty go hand in hand. What's new is often perceived as risk, like what's risky. There's a bias called congruence bias where we stick to something that we've already done in previously. It's why we go to the restaurant and order the same thing. It's why we listen to the same music on the way to work. All of these things that safe, even though there might be better options. And so there's a ton of biases that can kind of come into play like that. So we choose safety, we choose what's known, but those could be to our disadvantage. For example, if you could stay in your hometown your whole life, but if you never leave, you might not explore the world around you.
Right. And we do gravitate towards what's familiar, not necessarily the best situations, but familiar. It's like a play you've been in before. You know the part. I think also what to anticipate. By the way, I love the way you talk, and I'm writing down these phrases. I won't quote without giving you attribution, just so you know I'm good with that. But this idea of scratching an evolutionary itch, such a great line. This is from the beginning of time. We've needed this. It's really interesting.
Most of the time, we can track back a lot of these biases or a lot of the ways that we act to have an evolutionary background of working in small groups and needing to be able to work as part of a cohesive group. But the thing is that we are overstimulated. We have way too much social media, etc. What was originally developed as survival mechanisms could actually lead to bad decision making because we have too much on our plate. So, for example, authority bias. I think that's an important one for your audience. For the sake of making decisions faster and easier, we look to positions of authority to help us determine right from wrong. And authority bias is just the natural tendency to lean or to make your decisions based off of an authority or give more weight to what an authority is saying. And so we see it all the time. That would have been perfect in a tribe. If we had a tribe leader, he's like, hey, we're going to hunt over here versus over here. Everyone's going to be like, yeah, that's the right choice because our leader said it. But nowadays, you could see that bleed into a bunch of different things, whether that's leaders in any organization, a boss, politics, church, anything. We see it everywhere. Even just in a family, like it can go down to a Facebook group. It could be as small, but as long as there's a person in authority, we have a natural tendency to weigh their options or weigh their what they say with more reverence, I guess.
And what's interesting too, I've noticed is that when you have a leader, they can change their mind. They can contradict themselves. What's right on Tuesday is wrong on Wednesday, and you just go with it. I guess that's the new truth, which is so interesting. I guess that's kind of like this bypassing. Like, I'm not going to try to apply logic, chronology, put things together. I'm just going to, well, I don't know. Maybe you can let me know. Does it cause people to just go on kind of automatic pilot, like just coast and be led?
Yeah, that's exactly it. To where that autopilot versus manual, it gives you the ability to be in autopilot thinking. So the way I like to think about it is that, have you done any like DIY project or like any projects on the home recently in the past year?
Yeah, I mean, not great, but yeah, I've done, I've tried.
What project did you do?
I decided to do some painting with like stencils, making like a nice design around something. And it was great. Time flew, but of course it didn't quite look exactly as it did in the magazine, whatever it was, or online. But yes.
When you jumped into it and there was like a bunch of what ifs of, what I could do here, maybe I need this type of paint or whatever, and you went to go to the store and let's say you walk into the paint store and you're talking to the guy about it or talking to the girl or guy, whoever, naturally, because we have the problem or we have the lack of information when we walk into that store and, and you were talking to the person, he could have been like, yep, use this paint, use that one. You're going to want to do this, this, this. And that sense of like, all right, this guy knows what he's talking about, or this girl knows what she's talking about. I'm just going to follow their decisions or I'm going to follow their options or recommendations. It feels really comforting to us because it's just like, man, I don't have to think through this 100% myself. And so that's what leans into that autopilot, because autopilot feels good. It makes us feel like we're headed in the right direction without having to put in the legwork to fully think through our best options. Could you imagine walking into that store and he's like, yeah, you're going to want to go with this one. And you look at the row of 400 other different paints and you're like, do I really want to take this one versus all the different options here? Or should I just take this one and go with it?
Yeah, I guess it's calming. I'm curious. I'm thinking of an example. Always had a lot of animals growing up. And when I was raising my kids, I thought it was important for them to learn to care for animals. And we decided at some point with all the other animals, we decided to get guinea pig. Actually, great pets. And they talk, which is super cute. And they make different kind of squeaking sounds and whistling sounds. And it all means different things. I actually learned their language, which I didn't realize, which was weird. I was having people over and I walked past guinea pig who made some sort of sound. And I said, I'll get you water in a second. And people are like, I'm sorry, what just happened there? Animals sort of teach us their language a lot of the time. We don't realize it. But I felt guilty, actually, when I was reading, and the guinea pig didn't seem happy, and the other animals seemed joyful. It didn't seem happy. When I was in, I won't mention the store where I got it, I said, is it okay if we just get one? They said, oh, yeah, they're solitary animals. They're totally fine by themselves. Totally not true. They are communal, social, and she, I don't remember which one it was at the time, was depressed, isolated. And so we got another, and then suddenly they're squeaking and talking and purring and doing all the things. This person in the store had no idea. And I wonder, there's some people who would say, I don't know, let me find out, because they don't want to guide someone wrong and they don't want to be hurtful to the thing where they're relegating it to isolation just because they wanted to have an answer. There are people who will say, I don't know, let me find out. And others who will say, oh, yeah, I know. All these cult leaders who are like, I have the answer to life. I wonder what the difference is there between those personalities. I mean, I know that's a huge question, but I've always wondered about that.
I think that comes down to, on our end, when we're viewing those, we have to be able to create a really strong filter and look for a filter of information to understand who is the source and do I trust them. I feel like a lot of people don't have strong criteria around who they should take advice from. And I have an example of that. When I was younger and I was first getting into like working out, I would all the time listen to a really famous bodybuilder. And it took me a long time of trying to go through his eating and his working out and all of this to really understand that I shouldn't be taking advice from him because he uses steroids. And that completely changes me as a natural versus him who could be taking these things. And it wasn't that his advice was horrible. He still taught me fundamentals. But what I realized is that I should never really been listening to him in depth about overall strategy because he was using something that I wasn't, and it completely changed the results. And so it's just a strong lesson to me, at least, that we need to be extremely cognizant of who we're receiving information from because of things like authority bias and all that, because they might be just like your person at the store sold you the guinea pig, is that they might not know or they might not have our best interest at heart. And so it comes down to that first part on our end, having the filter for who we're getting information from. And secondly, the strongest filter we should be looking for or criteria of a leader is someone who operates from ethics, someone who, in my opinion, takes responsibility for the people that they lead. I like to give kind of an analogy on that. I used to do door-to-door sales, and my guys would always battle between, oh, I don't really want to be a pest. How do I get over that? I used to tell them it's all about taking responsibility for the people that we talk to. You're there to help and to leave them better than you found them. And so I feel like a lot of people don't have that when they get into leadership positions. They don't take responsibility for the people that they're helping. And that should be the basis of leadership, is I will care for them as if I cared for a family member or a friend. And if that means I have to have hard conversations or lead them into a right direction, I will, because I want to genuinely help them. And I feel like too many people have missed that.
Years ago, and I've talked about this on the podcast, I got to hear at a cult-related conference, I got to hear Robert Cialdini, who was talking about persuasion. He came from a business model talking all about reciprocity and scarcity and all the other thing. And it was genius. And he said, listen, if you don't believe me, just watch like the Home Shopping Network. You'll see everything that happens in a cult. But the idea of liking and social proof and all the things that happen that are really important to talk about. And now I think of this additional one, he has unity. I think of the people who all wear the same hat or whatever. We are all the same. Same thing with white supremacists.
Right. Familiarity.
Right. And so I would love to learn from you about these different biases that you have really, really studied, and the ones that affect people within group settings, the ones that really make people kind of lose a sense of themselves. And there's one that I would love you to start with, this idea of framing, that you can talk certainly more about.
The framing effect is a cognitive bias, is the tendency for people to make different decisions based on how information is presented rather than the facts themselves. Here's a good example. It kind of boils down to how I tell you about it changes how you view it, even if the information is the same. If you went into a grocery store, went to go buy a pack of meat, one pack on the left says 95% fat-free, and then the pack on the right says contains 5% fat. Which one would you choose? Most of us think that it sounds healthier for the 95% fat-free when they mean the same thing. How information is presented to us or how it's communicated to us dictates how we interpret it. This is a really powerful thing. It's called framing because think of like different glasses that you have on. If you're wearing glasses, if I were to put red glasses in for your glass or your lenses there, a red lens, you'd see everything red. If I changed it to blue, you'd see everything blue. And so the same idea is with information, is that based off of how I present it to you, it can dictate how you view everything. So an example of framing is if I were to take you to a meeting of some kind where there's going to be a public speaker, right before they hop on or right before we walk in, I look at you and I go, this speaker is the best speaker I've ever seen in my entire life. They have changed my life. You're going to love it. Versus in second scenario, if I said, I think this speaker is awful, so I want to watch them just to see what kind of mistakes they make, but like whatever they say in there, you're not going to like it. the information that the speaker is going to speak on is the exact same, but how I presented or introduced you to them, what I said right before we went and talked to them, dictates how you're going to interpret that information. Are you going to be closed off, or are you going to be more open to it? And so it's incredibly important when it comes to getting people to make certain types of decisions or guide people's decision making, is how am I presenting what I want to present to them.
That is fascinating. I think then it also goes into this realm of people don't realize how much they're being influenced just in advertising or by the person sitting next to them. Every once in a while, I've checked out some different cultic groups when people let me know about them. And if I can go to a meeting and the doors are not going to be locked, I will go. And they usually have ringers. They usually have people interspersed with different audience members seeming like they're there for the first time. But because sometimes I've gone to introductory meetings a few times, I see the same people there for the first time. They are there to work on whoever seems to be doubting or sort of on their phone, not totally engaged. And so they're not going to be signing up or paying for something. And it is fascinating. Like, I feel like they're using exactly what you're talking about. Like, they'll know what to say to get someone to see it a certain way. There's also this dangerous thing that happens with pseudoscience, where if people start to have certain kinds of physical manifestations of something that they're taking, usually someone who has given them that, who often knows nothing about actual science, will say, oh, that's good. The hives that you're having, that means that the toxins are coming out of your system, as opposed to, you're totally allergic to this. Stop taking it right now. Yeah, I think you can be guided to see something as beneficial when it's actually toxic in so many different ways. Wow, that's fascinating.
Yeah, it really is, especially when you realize that's where information, going back to kind of the filter, is that you have to have a really strong filter for information before you go in certain situations, or like kind of ways to counteract the framing biases, to really bring awareness when you hear a message, asking yourself awareness questions of who's saying it and how are they presenting it, their word choice, how did that come out? That's where I've noticed, at least I've caught the most type of framing, is say, what is the objective information here rather than the subjective interpretation that these people are giving me.
Right. I think about that even with headlines, like on our phones or whatever, and we just get this sort of quick headline about something. Already there's a bias. The focus is on the wrong person or whatever. It happens. It can be racist, sexist, a lot of different ways that people are talked about in our media. And I think, oh my goodness, we didn't stand a chance. From the beginning, we're already being guided down a certain path.
Absolutely. And to your point earlier about multiple biases at play, is that you could look at a single instance, something like one event. And I think when I first got into understanding biases, I also believed this. So I'm not saying this from any type of like, oh, it's so easy to understand. This is difficult for me to understand at first, but there could be multiple biases playing on us at the same time. For example, if you go to a rally, and I'm just saying like a political rally, you might experience 25 different biases within an hour, and you don't even know it. One of them being framing effect, like the way that the presenter is framing. One of them, they could be talking about, we mentioned something like the halo or horn effect, where we see one positive or negative quality about someone kind of shape how we view them. We can see authority bias. We can see all of these different things, and maybe not even just politically, but this could be from your viewers' perspectives. Like if they went to a meeting about joining a group, you might see multiple biases happening all at the same time.
Right. So tell us more about the halo and the horn effect.
The halo and horn effect, they're opposites of each other, but the halo effect is that when we see one positive thing about somebody, and that kind of sets the halo above them, and we then interpret everything from that person in a positive light, versus the horn effect is that we see one negative quality trait about somebody, and that paints everything after that in a negative light. The best understanding of the halo effect is pretty privilege. That when someone who's objectively attractive, we might believe what they say easier. We might think of them as smarter. We might think of them as more competent just because of the one quality of them being pretty. And then there's a unpretty punishment for horn effect, where somebody might have objectively maybe not the most attractive, or they might have a scar. It doesn't even have to be physical. They might be late to work their first day, and then their boss thinks, oh, that person's lazy. That's one thing that has now characterized everything they do moving forward. And so those are two very powerful biases. That's why people are saying first impressions are extremely important because of those.
Right. I think also about the studies that have been done about people in a courtroom on the witness stand and how a jury more often than not will see someone who they find magnetic in some way or charismatic or attractive as innocent, which is so incredibly unfair. Or even people who are famous, who take a political point of view or speak in front of Congress, and you're thinking, they might know what they're talking about, but they also might not know anything. But everyone is listening and everyone cares what they say.
Yeah, we're like, what does Spider-Man know about economic poverty or whatever? What is why is the Hulk talking to us about this or that? So 100%. That could even be leaning into authority bias, like a doctor. You could view a doctor and they're one, an authority, but two, they have a halo effect because they're seen as someone who's competent. So if a doctor were to try to give you advice on how to fix your car, you might actually hold it and take it for correct just because you know that they are a doctor and that's painted your perception of them.
Growing up in LA, and I'm sure in other cities too, high school kids and college kids would make a little extra money by being an extra on a set. Just being like people who are walking behind the window as the thing is happening inside, whatever. It's not like you have a big acting debut. But in the room where they have costumes, they're going to have a white lab coat that you can put on. And you're going to seem like you know what you're talking about, even though you work at Starbucks. It's very interesting how we are persuaded by the visuals.
Oh, so much. I think that's part of why when you see charlatans or people that lean into this concept of, oh, I'm going to try to be pompous or whatever, is that they dress up really, really nice. They wear the fancy watches or the fancy clothes specifically to evoke something like that, to try to use that to their advantage. So that's also another thing to keep cognizant of. And that's why it's so hard to practice this. But it comes back to that filter of always bringing awareness to how you're feeling and acting and try to ask yourself, why am I feeling this way? Especially if you meet someone that you're attracted to. You're like, all right, I got to be careful around here.
Right. Yeah. To put yourself on alert. The other one that I wanted to be able to ask about is the illusion of control. So talk to us about what that's about, because so much of what I deal with too is that people who feel like they somehow have the answers or they have control over their lives. And then when they leave, they feel so fragmented or unanchored and lost, but they didn't really ever have control. They just thought they did. And so it really is this illusion. But I've just sort of never expanded on that with someone. So I'd love to talk more about it.
So the illusion of control is the tendency to believe that one has influence over outcomes that are actually determined by chance. It happens when confidence in skill, effort, or routine leads to a false sense of control in random or uncertain situations. You might see this in like gambling. Someone might roll the dice and they're like, I'm going to get double sixes, and they're blowing on it and they're like, I can control that. Or a entrepreneur might want to do everything in their business thinking that they have the full control to really make it work when the market actually decides.
Yeah. And so I think it is a little hard for people to know that they never really had more power or say. They couldn't really drive what was happening, even though they felt like it. I guess it feels so good to just feel like it.
It gives us a sense of calm when we think that we do have more control than we really do, because when we having to admit that we don't have as much control also makes us admit a couple other different things, like things can happen to us that we don't like that we don't have any say over, or things that can happen to us. That actually leads back into the bias I think we originally started speaking about, which was the just world fallacy, which is people believe that the world is a just place, that good things happen to good people and bad things happen to bad people. And that's because we don't like the concept that bad things can happen at random. We like finding patterns and certainty in uncertain situations.
Yeah. In fact, I have this book, When Bad Things Happen to Good People. It does play with our sense of order, balance. I think that there's also this spiritual bypassing that happens where if you are this person, you will be rewarded. And if you do these things just so, everything will work out just fine. And if not, not. But then there is this, well, but I did everything and I still had this bad thing happen. Oh, well, it must be some explanation. There must be because you weren't doing it right or you weren't feeling it in your heart. Or it's like we still need to somehow make the equation come out right.
Yeah, or at least have the equation come out to it where it makes sense, even though making sense is subjective. There's this principle in our brains when we have a task that's come up or we have something that we're working on, our brain kind of puts it into like a mental to-do list or something that it wants to like complete. And when something is uncompleted or something is unanswered, it holds a ton of our attention, so much so that our brains like kind of fixate on it. It's called the Zargonic effect. A good example is why TV shows, if you're watching a TV show and it ends on a cliffhanger and you're like, I gotta watch the next episode over the next 2 or 3 days until the episode comes out, you're thinking about what could happen or how it might play out. It's because there's been like this open loop in your brain that your brain wants resolution for. And so it holds a lot of attention. Like I think 90% or something like that of attention allocation goes to these unanswered loops or unclosed loops.
There are these other things that I come across a lot in my work where people really do love, just as you're saying, they love having an answer and then they can just feel good. But it happens that then suddenly, like, they start sort of coming to, they start noticing, and they start noticing what they don't want to notice. And they still try to push it away for a long stretch of time. Like when someone says they've left a certain kind of controlling relationship, or they've left a cult, usually that was a long time in coming. And so we resist the truth at times because it's so uncomfortable. And I just wonder if there is some way to help people feel a little more comfortable, like, this is good. This is a good thing that I'm seeing this. This isn't a bad thing. It doesn't mean something bad about me, but it means I'm noticing what is going to help keep me safe here. We do fight it. It's interesting.
Yeah, you're talking about we basically fight the realization that something might have been negative.
Or someone is not all they said they were, or whatever else.
That's how we learn. We go through the experience and we update our beliefs. And then that dictates our actions moving forward. And that's the learning process. And so we don't want to get in our own way of our learning process. But we also have to be cognizant of some of these biases, how we might affect our own thinking. The way that we talk in our mind, we might tap into the framing effect and we might change the way that we think about things, or we might give our own selves biases based off of how we think or act. It gets really meta.
It does. It's really meta. There are two things also that I see a lot. One is that people have the sense that if something is not immediately understood, that it is of some higher level. There are so many of these people who will just say things that are nonsense. And they'll go on for a long time really saying nonsense or writing it. And when you're like in a cult, you're supposed to understand it. And if you don't understand it, there's somehow something wrong with you, but it's really not anything understandable. What is it about us in terms of our bias that we think if something is beyond our realm of understanding, that somehow it's more intellectual or it's more spiritual and we have to aspire to get it, as opposed to just saying, I think that person is insane. It doesn't make any sense at all.
When we don't know something, that jumping out at when we don't understand something and it must be above us, I think because the other person is talking like confidently, or whoever's telling us about it is speaking so confidently, that we defer to them for their confidence. If someone was teaching me about something, if the way that they're speaking, how confident they are in that decision gives us the confidence to believe that it's true, even without us being able to understand it. So that leans into that idea of us deferring to our outside environment for certainty. If we don't understand it, then it's uncertain. So what is the next deferment? It's how do I gain certainty? It's just give it to somebody else. It's like, hey, if they're saying it with such conviction, then it must be right, because otherwise they wouldn't be saying it. And that might be just a very natural inclination. I think there's a fallacy in there somewhere of just because you don't understand it doesn't mean it's true, but also just because you do understand it doesn't make it true.
Ooh, I like that. One other question, and answer this one or take it wherever you would like to take it. But there's this other thing that happens a lot where I find that people tend to believe things that sound really out there. Suddenly you have however many hundreds of thousands or millions of people who are talking about the lizard people or talking about the moon being hollow and they're watching us from the moon or flat earth, whatever it is. And I'm not saying these things are true or not true. I'm just saying that we've become desensitized also to hearing things that really sound out there. But sometimes if you say, did you hear so and so? She was able to levitate. I saw her levitate or whatever. We'll go, what? As opposed to just immediately saying, I'm sure that's not true. What is it about us that makes us go there, suspend disbelief to believe things are out there? Because it's scary to me how people start to believe things that are not at all based in fact.
I think a lot of people don't have the right processes they don't have kind of like a systematic approach to how they evaluate information for truth or not. And part of that is like, okay, who's telling me this? Are they a credible source? But also, what about this information can I improve and kind of think through? Because the nuance to this is that there is some level of mystery about our world, like the pyramids. How did they get there? And there's all these questions that still are unanswered. And so I feel like it's kind of fun in some ways to think through of the what ifs or what could be the new world. We explore one of the filters I was mentioning of the amygdala is novelty. So like it's a very salient thing to think through things that are new and exciting, and it really fills us. I think just subconsciously is that we like that. We're explorers. We naturally explore our environment to experience the world. But that's where it comes down to you have to have a system of how you approach new information and new things to give it a smell test. Is it something that's legit or is it something that's BS? And I think the stuff where there is the mysticism of the world, like the pyramids, those are still like really hard to find answers for or whatever. That kind of bleeds all of it together to where it's like, well, if we don't have answers for that, then it makes sense that we might not have answers for this. And it leads people into that awe and the excitement of the new and unanswered. Giving it a roundabout answer, I think it's just because it's really fun and exciting to look into the things that we don't yet understand or the things that we don't yet know for sure. But we just have to be careful with those, really careful with those, because that's how we might get caught into a situation that isn't helpful.
Right. Or someone who's going to try to sell us those answers, sort of feed on that. Or we're just going to decide it's aliens, which seems to be our go-to, our default to aliens. I used to actually joke with friends when you're watching all these shows, you're like, oh, it was aliens. Crop circle, alien. When we're in the dorm, there's no bread left. What happened? Aliens. You can kind of make a joke out of it. But in the work that I do, people get very caught up. Tell us about another bias or two or even three that just as we're talking and with the population of people getting caught up with sociopaths, with people who really pretend to be someone they're not, or religious groups that will say, we're going to give you all the answers or eternal life. And what are you going to give us kind of thing? What kind of biases are at play in those situations?
The first one that jumps out at me is the bandwagon effect. Bandwagon effect, it was pulled from 1950 politics, where they used to have bandwagons that would go through towns and people would see the bands on the bandwagons playing, and then the commotion or the excitement of building around the bandwagon, people would be jumping on to head to a political rally, and they would get caught up and jump in onto the bandwagon without really knowing anything about the politician.
I love this. It's never occurred to me to ask what the term bandwagon has come from.
Isn't that cool? Yeah, when I first learned that, I was like, all right, that makes a lot of sense. So the definition, it's where people adopt beliefs, behaviors, or choices primarily because they appear popular. Instead of evaluating facts or evidence independently, individuals interpret widespread adoption as proof that something must be good, true, or safe. In this way, popularity itself becomes a shortcut for judgment. And so that, along with social proof and groupthink is another bias, is that we look to others to help us understand how we should be thinking or acting. I think the fundamental thing we need to understand is look back hundreds and hundreds of years when we used to live in tribes, thousands of years when we used to live in tribes. We would act as a group that determined survival. And we still have all of those tendencies in our brain to this day. It's just they can be weaponized and used against us. So things like groupthink or in-group bias, out-group bias, bandwagon effect. All of these things determine how we act within a group. And so for any of your viewers, I would say that you have to adopt a sense of individualism to a degree whenever you're evaluating your options. And you have to be really cognizant of what everyone else is doing or what you might feel the pull towards if everyone else is doing it. Goes back to that one piece of advice. If everyone jumped off of a bridge, would you do it too? It's like you have to be really aware because it's ingrained in us, evolutionary, to want to be cohesive and want to work within a group and want to get along with our neighbors. Because if we weren't, if we pushed back against everyone, if we didn't go along and we didn't, if we made too many waves, we would face expulsion, getting kicked out of the group. And that meant potential death. So it's really, really important how we interact with the group and what other people think or do.
One of the things that gets really confusing within groups is that the group psychology causes people to want to fit in, and that if people are, let's say, listening to a speaker or a band or whatever, and other people are singing along and cheering or they seem happy, people will start doing the same so they don't stand out. I guess maybe for evolutionary safety.
Yeah, absolutely.
So people are faking each other out a little bit because a lot of people will leave a group and say, I know I was the only one who was unhappy there. And that is never the case. And it's actually usually the case that more people are unhappy than they're happy, but they know they need to smile. They know they need to seem fine. Or what a lot of cult leaders will do, they'll do public shaming. And they'll point people out and have them come up and be on the hot seat. And you don't seem to be getting it. And no one wants that to happen. And people are not able to speak privately to each other within cultic systems or within relationships with controllers because you gain currency by ratting people out. That's going to make the person happy. So there's no one to even talk to say, I am completely disillusioned or depressed or scared. And to have other people say, oh, yeah, me too. Absolutely. We're just going to smile through this. But it's fascinating everything that's at play in those moments.
Yeah. Creating the filter of first interpret the speaker and the message and say, what do I think about just this message aside from them as an authority or if they're handsome or she's good looking or whatever? What do I think about this? Because usually we get caught up in what everyone else is doing when the most important thing is the message. The most important thing is what's actually being said and if that is something that you align with or don't. Because, yeah, it can get really sticky really quick. That's where it goes back to creating that really strong filter of awareness and then having a systematic approach to how you actually consider and believe and being very meticulous about that, saying like, hey, I'm not going to let my emotions pull me. I'm going to try to bring awareness to it and slow it down. The biggest tip I would say is just you don't even need to have like the deepest filter or like, I don't want it to sound overcomplicated to your audience, but I would say when in doubt, slow down. That'll help a lot. They want a decision tonight, slow down. If they want XYZ, you to do this or pay that, slow down. Time will give you the ability to think through it better and really sleep on it and stuff. Like that's my 2 cents.
You also mentioned what to watch out for, like if you're noticing you're getting caught up in something. I guess you were saying, think about what's happening here or the visuals or who just talked in your ear about something. What else should people be looking for, either inwardly or outwardly, to see that their bias is being toyed with or exaggerated?
The first thing that jumps out is that if anyone's ever promising something that only God can give, peace, security, a connection with God, as a Christian, I practice. That's something that I'm always aware of, is if people are promising only that which God can give. And I feel like cult leaders get into the habit of playing God and trying to promise the world when peace, inner peace, isn't given from a guy on a stage. It's given from a relationship with God, like a true relationship. And so that's probably one thing to think of. And that's kind of like could add into your filter systems. Okay, is this person overpromising? And then I would say actions rather than words, looking at how people act, because that's who they are. Letting their actions speak. I would say that's probably the other best piece is just If they say one thing, do another, look at what they do rather than what they say. Trust your gut. A lot of people hear that, but there's actually millions of neurons in your stomach. They call it the second brain. Your microgut biome is something that can quite literally tell you how to interpret information. We don't have enough time, but we could go deeper into that. But I would just say trust your gut, look at their actions versus what they say, and then have God be the authority rather than someone, if they're overpromising, only that which God can give.
Oh, that's so great. That's so important. And maybe that's also why controllers will tell you to ignore yourself, to ignore the messages that you're sending, the feelings in your body, because they know not only how powerful they are, but how accurate they are. That's so interesting. I haven't heard about it being the second brain. A lot of people will have things register. They'll feel nauseous. They'll have a tightening. There are other places in the body where things register that would be good for people to watch out for.
Yeah, absolutely. So many studies. I want to eventually make a video on this, but it is very interesting. They've done studies of people who go to gambling or like go and play poker, and when they have a good hand or a bad hand, their hands start to sweat before they even register it in the brain. So like our body responds even faster than our brain does. So it's very important because through your spine, it connects your entire body and really comes to the stomach. And so that's why it's important to trust your gut.
Wow, right. And not trust someone who says, don't trust your gut.
Yeah. Yeah. Be careful about that for sure.
Right? Yeah. Don't listen to it. Listen to me. No. Okay. In fact, it's now the opposite. Thank you for that. There is so much more to talk about. I think ending here is just perfect when you're telling people to go back into listening to themselves, and that's your powerful guide, and that your body, your mind is talking to you all day, and you don't want to listen to someone telling you not to listen to it. I really appreciate that last part, and it's really helpful, very empowering. It's going to help keep some people safe, but to take, I guess, like you're saying, to connect it with your other point, which is to take some time away to do that. Because I think when you're in something, you're so overwhelmed or maybe rushed or all the things that we talked about that you don't have time to step back and notice and read yourself.
Exactly. And as a Christian myself, I believe that the Holy Spirit dwells within us. We're as a temple, and that's how God can guide you. And so you want to give yourself the ability to let the Holy Spirit guide you and not let the flesh dictate too many of your decisions. I guess that is what it can kind of boil down to.
Wow. It was such a pleasure to talk to you. I learned so much. I wrote down so many great points, and I look forward to seeing more of the content that you put out and your book and all of it. Where can people find you and your channel and anywhere where you're putting content out?
On Instagram and TikTok, I'm at Davis Carbo, DavisCarbo. I'm going to be getting into YouTube in this next year. Through those channels, I'll be selling the Unbiased book. Hopefully it's coming out before the end of this year. I'm going to try to see if I can get it out before Christmas. But yeah, that's all I have at the moment. But who knows, I might want to get into other stuff.
Cool. Well, whenever you want to get into other stuff, happy to talk to you again.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Sure. Of course. It was great. Thank you so much. One more thing before you go. Thank you so much to Davis for illuminating so many things, teaching us about bias, which is something that we all grapple with. It's part of the human condition. He was talking about sometimes how we have this interesting bias that he calls framing bias. How something is presented is how we perceive it. And this happens all the time. If somebody comes out wearing some kind of outfit that makes them look very professional, or the example I gave about wearing a lab coat and people think you're a doctor, people really have an impression of you that then leaks into their experience when they hear you speaking. They will attribute a lot more to you. Like when you walk into an office and there are many plaques on the wall, awards, credentials. I remember one time walking into an office and seeing all of those when I was meeting with someone who had been assigned to something that I was dealing with. And I thought, oh, good. She's really, really qualified. Turns out she was, but also this wasn't her office. So I was assuming that she had gone to Stanford and all these other places, but no, that wasn't her. So it also happens if you've ever gone to see the taping of a show. This happens a lot in Los Angeles, and I'm sure also in New York and some other big cities. And you go in, and then they will have this big sign that says applause, and you have to give this rousing applause. Or sometimes they'll tell you to laugh, and they'll tell you to laugh louder. In fact, there have been studies that when comedies were put on TV, they developed this thing called a laugh track so that the audience, either at home or in the studio, would hear laughing and then would laugh along, thinking, if this is funny to all these other people, even though it's a recording, we don't know it's a recording. We think other people are laughing, so we're going to laugh too. And people actually liked the show more, thought it was funnier when they heard this laugh track, which is simply a recording of people laughing. And there is something about how much we can be convinced that something is wonderful if we go into a restaurant and something is very, very expensive, or we hear that someone has ordered something and they're thanking the waiter for it. Thank you. This was amazing. This was the best fill in the blank that I've ever. And then you might think, oh, I want to get that too. And it's also true that within cultic groups, there is this sense that the person in charge is sort of this superior mind, and also that what they're offering you is this singularly wonderful information that you can only get here. So you take it in as though it is from on high, like it's the Dead Sea Scrolls, when it could just be that the guy wrote it that morning. The other thing, though, that I think is so compelling that we see over and over again is what Davis really described beautifully and illuminated for all of us, this idea that dopamine, the release of dopamine, increases with the anticipation of something. So once you get it, it's not so much fun. And the dopamine levels go down. So what does anticipation do? It keeps you on the hook, keeps you hanging on, keeps you waiting. It keeps you thinking and imagining that whatever you're here for is right around the corner. And all you have to do is sign up for the next whatever it is, or show your devotion a little bit more, give more money, or whatever they're needing. But I know that I've worked with enough people who said they devoted years being in wait of salvation, of the answers, of being cured of something. And it never happened. And sometimes they thought they were close, but still they realized in retrospect they were sort of talking themselves into thinking they had gotten it, or feeling better because they were convincing themselves that this cure was working, only to have it not work. Because sometimes you can will yourself to feel better from something for a short time through a mind-body connection, but it won't last. And so when we are in this situation where we're waiting and waiting and waiting, we think we can't turn back now because we have waited so long, or we've donated so much, or we've already worked up to the next levels, or we have shown ourselves to be really good devotees. And so we're told, now, if you just keep going with it, you'll receive the gifts that you've been promised. I often tell people to write down when they're promised something that seems too good to be true, or it's actually just what the person in charge promised they'd be giving you that sounds so good. And then check in with yourself. Don't necessarily check in with them and say, when am I going to be receiving this thing that I wrote down that you said you were going to be giving me, or that is the reason that I signed up for this? Because they will put it back on you. Why are you being so impatient? Maybe you need to look at yourself to see why you haven't achieved that yet. or you can't rush this, or whatever excuses. Make sure to keep it somewhere and to put somewhere on your phone or your calendar, check this. And it could be every month, could be every year. It depends how long you want to give this. And see if the things that you were promised have come true. And if they haven't, and it should have already been done, and when you ask, or when you even imagine bringing it up with them, you probably already know what they would say. And if they say, oh, you're almost there, then hear that as, you'll never get this. Or if they say, this is on you, if you haven't received it, if this hasn't come true for you, or you haven't been healed in these ways because you weren't feeling it in your heart, or you have clogged passageways for the energy, and now we need to give you a class that you can take so you can, clear out your clogged passageways. That was actually from a particular cult group that someone was in. Then, if they revert to blaming you, know that what they're saying is, you will never get this, and I had no intention of giving it to you. I want you to really hear what it means that they're keeping you in this release of dopamine. They're keeping you on the hook. They're keeping the carrot dangled just outside your reach. And the reason is that your participation there works for them. It's not intended, and it was never intended to work for you. You are keeping their machine going through your money, through your devotion, through your task of maybe bringing in new members, of enrolling people in the next level, whatever they call it. But ultimately, it's a very selfish endeavor on their part. And I want you to be able to break free sooner. And just like what happens in a lot of multi-level marketing, they will say, well, don't stop now. People usually stop right before they have their big breakthrough or right before they get their big windfall. And if you notice they say that every time, again, there was never any intention of making sure that your hard work and your sacrifice was ever going to be worth it, and that they were going to be people of their word. I'm sorry to tell you this. I'm trying to save you a lot of time and a lot of effort wasted. You deserve better. Take good care. Talk to you next week.
Thank you very much for listening. Please support IndoctriNation on Patreon at patreon.com/indoctrination. Be sure to give us a follow on our social media. Find us on Facebook and Instagram using @IndoctriNation Podcast. And for Twitter, find us at @_indoctrination. We love hearing from you too. So send us an email at indoctrinationshow@gmail.com. And for more updates on the show, visit our website at www.podpage.com/indoctrination.
If you're a podcast host, listen up, this one's for you. My name is Allie Jackson. I'm the host of Finding Mr. Height, a dating and relationship podcast that I've been doing for 4 years now, sharing my positive and practical approach to dating that's built on my own life experience. And I wanted to share another experience that I've had, my secret behind monetizing my show. It's called Red Circle, and I was just telling my colleague about how much I love their platform. With Red Circle, not only am I getting a seamless hosting experience, but I also love the support I receive in ad sales. It's not just typical ad sales either. It's targeted opportunities based on my show and my life. And the platform is super simple. You just set your preferences and Red Circle matches you with sponsors that align with your show. You can vet every opportunity and their platform gives you great analytics. More recently too, my Red Circle team has brought me opportunities outside of my podcast on social media to really augment the podcast partnerships, bring them full circle. I just can't recommend them enough. If you want to give it a try, go to redcircle.com to get your free trial. That's redcircle.com for a free trial.